What happened Saturday night in Columbus? Buckeyes lose to the Sooners 31-16. I have no idea, so I've got to go to somebody much smarter than I. Claire Crawford from the ozone.net. Please join her right there and her podcast with Joe Dexter. Oh, hail no. Claire, how you doing today?
You're getting really good at the hail part. Oh, hail no. The emphasis is primo. It's perfect.
You would almost think I've practiced it. You would almost think I
good
practiced.
Practice, exactly.
Maybe a little bit more practice for the Buckeyes passing attack and pass defense after Saturday night. So the number 2 team in the nation, touchdown favorite, we saw all of it. If you're a college football fan, most likely that was the game you were tuned into, even if you weren't a Buckeyes fan on Saturday night. So the assessment almost seems obvious, but what's your take?
You know, the difficult part as a Buckeye fan watching that game, knowing that the game was not in hand by the Buckeyes the entire time. You know, sometimes you can see a team struggling, but they still feel like the game is in hand. Even when it was tied at the half, you still felt like Oklahoma was dominating that game. And I think it's because we saw more of the same of what we saw against Indiana. The Buckeyes in the game were winning battles. They were at that point. Oklahoma had fumbled twice, and they had missed a field goal. And they were winning field position. The Buckeyes were. So those little battles, and you and I talked about it last week. Those are the battles you have to win in order to tip the scales of a football game. It still didn't feel like the Buckeyes were in that one. And again, we'll dive a little deeper into that, but it definitely felt different as far as a loss standpoint than some of the other losses, like a Virginia Tech in 2014.
Yeah, in terms of the feel of the game, I had the same vibe in regards to, okay, Ohio State's tied at halftime. They are getting clearly outplayed. That was obvious. So you can go one way or the other with that. You can say, okay, Oklahoma had its shot. Ohio State's going to kick it into gear. Oklahoma has blown this. They've blown their opportunities. They should be up by 14 points. They're not. Now it's going to be a different game. Or, it's only inevitable. Oklahoma's outplaying them. They seem to be the better team. And the points are going to come, and it's bad news for Ohio State right now, especially when you think back on some of the wins and the losses in recent years, some of the bigger games. Oregon marched right down the field the first opening drive in the championship game. Alabama jumped out 21-6. They obviously got down to Michigan last year by 10 points. They continued to come back in big games, not by huge margins, but came back a number of times after looking sluggish early.
I think as fans, we saw a team that was at the half still just white-knuckling it the whole way. Like you said, the vibe was that Oklahoma was dominating this football game, and I think as fans, the reason that was perceived, even though it was tied, and we've seen the Buckeyes down in other games and other big stages, and we saw the same problems as the previous week, not just the previous week, but from the previous game against Clemson and from the second half of the season where the offense was struggling and receivers are not making separation and JT is either not making reads or the defense is not making adjustments. And another problem that we saw that we hadn't seen before that made us all weary as fans, and I'm speaking for an entire fan base right now, I know, but the linebacker play was unusually suspect, unusual, and as in like not something that we see at Ohio State very often. And it may have been a symptom of Ohio State linebackers and safeties trying to do too much and not being a disciplined defense. And that's something that will have to be shored up. Luckily, that is coachable. But it's something that we saw as fans continuing on. And I think that's why all of us were like, how are they going to fix this? This is an adjustment that should have been made, 3 quarters ago, i.e. Indiana.
Claire Crawford joining us from the ozone.net. Join her there for her podcast in particular, Oh, Hail No. Ohio State reeling after the 31-16 loss to Oklahoma. Claire, how many teams would line up against Oklahoma and not be as good? I'm not talking about overall as good a team, but just their passing offense would be so much more productive. We're talking about average teams in every conference. We could pluck them out of every conference, and they would throw it with more success than Ohio State. It's really tough to watch JT Barrett stand there and look for receivers. I thought the offensive line actually, for as much as that was the issue over the second half of last year, that they actually pass protected for the most part. It's not going to be perfect, but they pass protected pretty well. It was just what you just said, separation. And JT, maybe it's difficult when you're watching on TV because you don't see the play downfield as the play's developing, but JT holding the ball and waiting for something. And then I try to not be the guy that can outcoach the coaches that know more than them, because I know 1/10 or 1/1000th of what they know about football, especially guys like Urban Meyer and Kevin Wilson. But I watched Oklahoma's offense, and it seemed very creative. And I watched Oklahoma's offense, and I thought, why couldn't they do that with J.K. Dobbins? Slip him out of the backfield, throw him a pass, go misdirection, and all of a sudden he's an outlet over here. And I just saw this creativity out of Oklahoma, and I thought J.K. would be a perfect, not that he would be the only one, but, man, get him the ball in space.
And he's proven himself as a pass catcher. And we also saw him prove himself in pass protection. I agree with you about the offensive line, with the exception of Isaiah Prince. Had another bad game, and he's a very integral part of that offensive line, or that position is an integral part of that offensive line. He was a problem again. Matt Burrell played on special teams all night, so not sure what the switch up was about. But certainly their teams know that that's the issue with Ohio State. They're dropping back 8 and only rushing 3. The offensive line certainly should be able to handle that, and they did for the most part. And on the second part of what you mentioned, as far as the creativity, that's definitely something that the Buckeyes are able to do with the talent that they have, especially with J.K. Dobbins, especially with that. That is J.T. Barrett's strength. Is the read option is JT Barrett. And I feel like he's being kind of forced into being something that he's not. And I think that's partially responsible for his appearance of regression, or appearance of him staying kind of in the same spot. And I don't know whether it is the fact that Kevin Wilson is running an up-tempo offense and they don't necessarily have time for slower developing or more complicated plays. Whether it's because he's new that they haven't had time to really install something really intricate, or if it's just plain and simple that these receivers are not getting open, these receivers are not creating separation. JT doesn't trust, JT doesn't have confidence to throw them open. JT is not making good zone reads, or he's not going through his progressions. All of those things could be responsible for the breakdown in this broken unit right now. I think all of them can be fixed. It's whether or not will they be fixed.
I think the Isaiah Prince comment that you just made is very astute, very good point, because we think of the left tackle being the most important because of the quarterback's blind side. But what Ohio State does, and what the teams against them have done through 2 games, is try to neutralize a good defensive front by getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly. So actually what's more important in that is when your quarterback's just dropping 3 steps or already in the spread formation, is they've got somebody as a right-handed quarterback, somebody in their face immediately. And the left side isn't quite as important if they're releasing the ball quickly because they're coming from the backside. We're thinking more traditional offense in the pros, with the left tackle is more important because the guy's standing in the pocket forever and waiting for things to develop. But the right side is extremely important in the quick offense because JT Barrett, in this case, has a right tackle and the defensive end right in his face immediately when that's not being blocked. So that's difficult. And then we can turn to the defense, and Oklahoma, again, because of the skills of Baker Mayfield, and because of the type of offense that they ran, similar to Indiana in terms of the concept of getting the ball out of the hands quickly, they neutralize the most dominant portion of Ohio State's team, and that's the defensive line. And even when they extended the play and the line had time to try to get to Baker Mayfield, he obviously was very adept at slipping out of things.
And Baker Mayfield did exactly what we as fans and those who follow college football did exactly what we thought he would do. And he stuck to what he was good at. He does do well extending plays. He does do well when forced out of the pocket. He does do well with just last minute finding a receiver, making some circus play. And it's part of who he is as a player. It's part of what's going to get him invited, most likely, to the Heisman ceremony. However, what we thought going into the game is that by him extending these plays, giving the defense a little more time to get after him, it wasn't a problem for him because of the linebacking play being just wide open plays in the middle. It's not anything that we expected to see. And then cornerbacks, again, it wasn't this time necessarily that these receivers were covered by these corners every time. It was we were actually seeing some blown coverage. And that is something that's unexpected and unacceptable from a talent level. And again, I know I got skewered for saying it, but they're still not turning to look for the ball. And it cost them a couple times, I think. So it's something that we can still hang on to as Buckeye fans as far as the silver lining is concerned with this defensive line. We saw them only allowing 104 yards on the ground. Only still shoring up the run game. Oklahoma was really not able to get that going. So it's something that, if you want, again, a shelter in the storm, that's something that we can look at and say it's a good thing. And then going forward, looking at next week against Army, knowing that they run the ball about 90% of the time, they do not have a pass attack. As of the last two games, it's something that the Buckeyes can expect going forward in this next couple games, hopefully, to be able to see improvement on as well. But yeah, it was not something that we expected, that defensive line was not going to get as much penetration as they had hoped. Sam Hubbard had a great day.
Yes, he did. Yes, he definitely did. Made some big plays behind the line of scrimmage. As you mentioned, it's much chronicled what Ohio State has produced in the defensive backfield going to the pros, and then it just keeps churning and churning and churning, and you expect the next group of guys to be just as good. If you look at the recruiting rankings, that's kind of an assumption to be made. These guys are probably just as fast, can jump just as high, are just as freakish athletically, but playing in the secondary and being a cohesive unit means you don't blow coverages, means you have ball skills that have been developed and a lot of other things, and that's obviously lacking, and that's always kind of a question mark when you transition players and go to young talent. You can look at the talent and say, oh, this guy will just step in, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes that happens. Other times, no, there's development, and we know that not all the 4 and 5 stars turn out. Most of the time, about half of them. So we shall see what the defensive backfield holds against the likes of Trace McSorley down the line and some better passing attacks in the Big Ten. But as you mentioned, for Army, if Ohio State has trouble defending the pass this week, then there's real trouble, Claire. 20% passer right. Ahmad Bradshaw comes to town, and he's thrown for 17 yards in 2 games.
I don't think it's going to be an issue whatsoever. And, the difficult part is that you see games like this against Army, knowing that it could be a, quote, confidence builder. But I don't know if it feels like a shallow sense or a false sense of security for these Buckeyes if they're able to pick off, get a couple turnovers. And if they're able to stop this run game against the Army. I don't know if that's a false sense of security, but as far as JT is concerned on that side of the ball, it may actually develop a little more confidence with his receivers, a little more confidence in his own ability to be accurate and his own ability to throw somebody open. Marcus Baugh is another one that we haven't really talked about. He seems to get overthrown by JT a lot. He's somebody that could have helped out Isaiah Prince a lot. And it's something that we haven't really seen out of him yet this year. He's been targeted more than any tight end I've seen in a really long time at Ohio State. Nick Vanette is obviously playing on Sundays now, and he's probably like, what the hell, man? I didn't get this much action. So Marcus Baugh clearly has the ability. It's not something that we even see at the college level as much as he's getting targeted. So he definitely, he and JT need to somehow have a get together.
Marcus Baugh, I believe, caught one pass in this game. I'm a little rusty in regards to looking at the stats late Saturday night, but I believe he caught one pass, and it always runs through my head when I see him catch his one pass per game or one every other week. I think, man, this guy is a big, strong guy. He's a monster, and when he heads up field with the ball, he just knocks people over, and he looks like an NFL tight end. That doesn't mean he's got the skill or the pass catching ability. I don't remember him dropping too many passes. Yeah, it's just a chemistry deal that hasn't developed between he and JT, but that's some utilization that could be coming, hopefully. And then you mentioned, yeah, if you're having pass protection issues, especially in one spot, the tight end is usually the guy that you point to, and especially when he's a big physical guy like Marcus Baugh, not just a pass-catching Jimmy Graham kind of tight end, but a guy that can legitimately block. That should have probably been in the game plan a little bit more.
I completely agree with that. And I think part of Marcus Baugh not getting as many receptions as he should, he's definitely being targeted, probably still not as much as he should be. JT overthrew him a couple times. So especially looking back at the Indiana game, one very close, if not in the end zone, that JT missed by 8 mile. Marcus Baugh is usually, it's got a mismatch on him throwing a linebacker. If we saw more of Marcus Baugh across the middle, I think that's really tough to defend.
And one more note on the offense. They did have the nice drive coming out of halftime. It was the J.K. Dobbins drive that he finally got the ball 3 or 4 times. And then the next drive, I think, stalled, but Mike Weber ripped off a couple nice runs in a row. And I was wondering, it seemed like the next drive after that they immediately went like pass, punt. And I was wondering where the running game went since they seem to have established that. And, of course, they weren't going to come back just running the football, but they had plenty of time, and they were only down like a score at that point. But they were committed to continue to try to find Paris Campbell and KJ Hill and guys that just weren't separating and, again, not in sync. I think they gave up on the run game a little too soon.
I think so too. And we talk about utilizing the run game as a part of this strategy and as a part of this chess match that is football. It has its place in setting up the pass. And I just think they hadn't quite utilized it long enough to set it up. And if it's working, you ride that horse into the sunset. JK, absolutely. 13 carries for JK Dobbins is unacceptable at this point. He is proven as even in pass protection and as a pass catcher and as this incredible, you watched him break ankles when he was out there against Oklahoma. It's unacceptable at this point for J.K. Dobbins or the combination of J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber to be under 20 carries. Unacceptable.
Claire Crawford from the ozone.net and her podcast as well with Joe Dexter. Oh, hail no. Please join them there for the best in Ohio State football coverage and with a little flair of food, fun, a lot of other good talk.
We definitely talk about food a lot.
You like your food.
You can also follow me on Twitter at Buckeye Claire.
All right. And I'm guessing that the recipe for a win against Army, or not necessarily a recipe as a 30-point favorite, that would be a shock, would be just, hey, let's see some life out of the passing game and let's see the secondary or the... Again, that's going to be difficult because Army's just not going to throw it. Okay, this brings me to one thing. I digress a little bit here, Claire, but the issue I have with scheduling Army, Navy, Air Force, throw Georgia Tech in the mix, is it really doesn't help you practice to defend any other offense that you're going to play. So you've got to stop your normal regiment of practicing. Yes, every offense is different, and they have to game plan differently, but basically everybody, especially in the Big Ten, is running the same base offense. They run a spread, they run a read option. It looks primarily the same. You've got to stop your defensive progress in game planning and in just getting in reps against our typical offense by playing an Army. I would not schedule Army or Navy myself.
It is, and I also don't think UNLV or Rutgers are going to get them ready for Penn State. But I'm not sure at this point what could get them ready for Penn State. That's going to be, I wouldn't say their first biggest test, but it's their next biggest test. And it better be their only next biggest test. But certainly it's an opportunity where we might actually see it's not going to test your defense as much, but it certainly is going to have, as fans, we might see somebody like Dwayne Haskins when the Buckeyes are well ahead and have a game in control. Every fan that's out there calling for JT's jersey might actually see their pal Dwayne Haskins and see what he has to offer in the fourth quarter of that football game. Not in any way saying that Dwayne Haskins is going to be replacing JT Barrett, but certainly he needs good game time reps, and that's something that we might see as fans.
And Urban Meyer stated after the game clearly that JT Barrett is the starter and there is no thought of a change there. Do you think his thinking might be a little bit different if Joe Burrow was healthy?
I don't think so, honestly. We saw the waffle back and forth, what that did to JT mentally when he and Cardale were fighting for a job. That's someone who legitimately had a chance to usurp JT Barrett. Well, technically, JT Barrett was trying to usurp Cardale at that point. I think it's important for JT to progress, if he is going to progress, to know that that is his spot. And that's counterintuitive to what we know about Urban Meyer and what he normally does. We say competition breeds success in that program. And I think across the board for the rest of the positions and the rest of the team, that's the case. I think if JT Barrett went out and threw 4 picks, Andy Dalton style, then maybe we would. I'm a Bengals fan too. Unfortunately, we would see a change if that were the case. But that's ball security has not been an issue for the most part, and I think that's probably more important than seeing this past game progress and seeing it actually start to get off the ground is very important. But if JT were turning over the ball multiple times in the game, I think that's when they would consider possibly yanking him. But I don't know. And Joe Burrow is a different kind of quarterback in this offense.
Always love the discussion with Claire Crawford. Join her on the ozone.net and for her podcast with Joe Dexter. Oh, hail no. Buckeyes taking on Army, 4:30 Fox in Columbus, 30-point favorite this Saturday. All right, Claire, thanks for stopping by as always.
Thank you again for having me.